Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for coming in. A welcome measure, I think. I want to learn more to address the vacant and derelict sites issues and turning those into much needed homes. And I have a number of clarifications to seek from you today. First of all, just to clarify the ownership of the publicly held land, which is currently publicly held, before but also after development. So that's one question. To clarify the ownership of the homes that are built, it's 60, 30 and 10. Will those homes be in the ownership of the state? Will they be in the ownership of individuals? Will they be in the ownership of developers? Will they have corporate landlords? And there is a question, and again I would press you on the definition of affordable. And as you rightly said, every home is affordable to somebody if you've got enough money. But it does seem to be a crux of an issue, so I would like to hear some more from you, but also what an affordable rent might be. And the success of places like Vienna and Hamburg is to do with security of tenure as well as a reasonable rent. So I'd like to hear from you about that. I want you to clarify to me if there is any profit, to whom it will accrue, and where will it go. The governance arrangements, I'd be interested to know more about a designated activity company, and mitigations against conflicts of interests in the board, in the staff. There was a lot of golden circles that got us into a lot of difficulty. How can we mitigate against that? Freedom of information, measures against lobbying, all of those things. How can we be certain that this company won't make the same mistakes that were made before? And then clarifying interagency, intersectoral arrangements with local authorities, the interface with local plans, the interface with the housing authority, the interface with approved housing bodies, the interface with developers. Is there a possibility that this new entity will create additional duplication, additional delays? Has anything arisen to date that needs to be ironed out before we put something into law? Are there any learnings that we need to know about? And finally, and it's a question for Ms. Graham, you said in your presentation, the general scheme makes clear that the LDA must have regard to the policy of government on proper planning and sustainable development and contribute to the economic and social development of the state, whilst at the same time obtaining a positive financial return for the state. So that's a balancing statement there. How will it be balanced? Who will decide? How will it work in practice? It would seem to me a little bit vague. So clarifications on those questions I would most welcome. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Senator Kelleher. Mr. Coleman, let's start with yourself.
Thanks, Ciara. Thanks, Senator, for the questions and observations. Just working back on some of the queries that you had, and you raise a good point. Look, are we adding another layer here on top of what's already there between local authorities and other bodies, other public bodies? And I would say a firm no on that. I think we are only looking to get involved in situations where we're additive, where we're not, where something that could be done is perhaps not being done, or say, for instance, where a public body doesn't have a housing remit. That can we go in and make, say, that piece of land available for housing while also taking account of their own operational needs. So I would say certainly not with duplication or delays. It's the contrary. It should be only where there's a void or filling a gap, or we're taking delays out of the process. That's our objective. Just touching on some of the points that you make in terms of the ownership of publicly owned land and when it's built, who's going to own it. And I guess there's no simple answer for that because it's going to be a multitude. So, for instance, some houses will be built and sold to occupiers. So occupiers will own them. Some of the homes will be social housing homes and will be built and held by local authorities or their nominees, like approved housing bodies. Some homes will be, say for instance, like on Shangana, will be built through the LDA in partnership with Dún Laoghaire and will be held in the short to medium term at least by the Land Development Agency and rented to people at a mid-market level. So there's a multitude of different ways that the homes will come out. We're not restricting ourselves to any particular tenure. In terms of what is affordable and shouldn't we be looking to emulate examples from other jurisdictions, I think the two things there, what is affordable is a key question, I agree. And secondly, shouldn't we be looking to emulate examples like in Vienna, where cost rental, as you may be aware, is a big tenure. And on those examples in Europe, we are looking closely at those. We've participated in a lot of the discussion and attention that's been on cost rental and the Vienna model as well over the past year. And we've spoken at many events as well. And we would see cost rental product that we're looking to deliver in Shangana and in other locations on the other sites that we have access to as well as being entirely consistent with that, and something that will be sustainable over the long term, because as its name implies, the rent is a fair rent that is set to recover the costs of delivering that product. So that is something that we would see as entirely consistent with our mandate. And I guess what that does is, far from, and the point was made, is this privatisation of state assets? It actually, this model expands the state's reach into housing and housing delivery and housing stock. Currently, our reach as a state is through social housing only, but if you look at places like Vienna and Hamburg and the Netherlands and others, social housing means a different thing over there. It's a much broader cohort of the population. Half the population, maybe 60% in the Netherlands, live in what they call social housing, but it's a much broader thing over there.
Very good security of tenure.
Well, that's it. And on security of tenure, if we are going to hold and operate, at least in the short to medium term, cost rental accommodation, you want people to stay and continue to pay the rent so that you can continue to operate and deliver the product in an efficient way. And you don't want people, we won't be like, say, private sector landlords that would be happy in a rising rental market for people to leave because you can recalibrate your rent perhaps at that point in time. That's not our objective. We would want people to stay, and looking in jurisdictions like Germany and others where people would stay in rental accommodation for 13, 14, 15 years, that is something that we would want to offer to people. We're not saying they have to do that. They might have other aspirations, but we would like to offer that to people. And I think that has a number of benefits, including the avoidance of transient communities, the building of communities in areas and so on.
But if you don't own it, how can you guarantee that? I mean, that's a question we can come back to.
Well, in some respects, the LDA would own it.
But only 10%.
No, the 30% affordable requirement could be delivered by way of cost rental.
But 60% still would be held.
In some locations, but in local authority lands where we're dealing with that, or perhaps some of the housing agency lands, it's going to be much higher. For instance, in Shangana, it's 100% social and affordable, so it won't be the same everywhere. In terms of the question, what is affordable, as I mentioned to Deputy Barry earlier on, it is a key question. We're taking an evidence-based approach to it. We have the constraints of being able to deliver a product that covers its costs, ultimately, on one level, and then on the other level, providing something that's genuinely affordable, because it's no good if we produce something that is based on cost rental or covers its costs, but it's not affordable to the target market. So that's why we're doing a lot of work to understand what is our target market. It's those middle deciles of income, as we see it, of household income. It's trying to understand more what percentage of that income should be available to these people for accommodation costs, while allowing them to live an enjoyable life, to be able to cover their own costs of living that are outside housing costs. So we're doing a lot of work around that at the moment, usually as a rule of thumb, or the perceived wisdom is that in and around a third of a person's net disposable income should be available for housing costs. So that's in and around what we're targeting for those middle deciles of income.
Any answers on the governance?
Ms. Graham might take over.
Yeah, I
yes,
might take
please.
the oldest deputy just to clarify. There were a couple of points that you wanted on that. Firstly, in terms of the DAC, or the Designated Activity Company, under the Companies Act 2014, that replaced what we used to refer to as limited companies, and many of our commercial state bodies would be in that corporate form. As you look at the general scheme, there are a couple of areas where that doesn't apply, where we disapply that. So say the accounts being given to the Controller and Auditor General is a mix of the company law and the state governance piece. The other element you were talking about in terms of the objects of the LDA and having regard to planning policy and a number of other aspects. On the first piece, on the planning policy, I would say the LDA is really a creature of the National Planning Framework. It has been set up to support the goal of compact growth and to deliver on the population requirements that are coming from the MPF. It will be obviously applying for planning permission, and they will have to be consistent with the policies that are set out by local authorities in the cascade that will come down from that. The other elements were around contributing to the economic and social development and the competitiveness and a financial return. So it's acting commercially, if I could describe it, with a conscience, so it's the economic aspects and the social development both being taken into account. In terms of the profits that may accrue, in the case of all commercials, the dividend policy is set down by the relevant minister. In this case, the majority minister is the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. All dividends from state bodies accrue to the Exchequer. And in the shareholder expectation letters that I mentioned that all such commercial bodies get, the dividend policy is usually set down. That can, in some cases, be, say that perhaps in an early stage of the evolution of a body that there are not returns required, it's to be reinvested in, or it may set a particular requirement. So that's a kind of long-term objective. So I hope that covered the issues. Just say that the cost rental model as well is something that we, with the department, with the LDA and the housing agency, are looking at all these aspects of, because we do have definitions of affordable housing within statute and within regulations, and then there is the wider concept, if you like, of affordable housing that I think we have been talking about as well. And the 40% we're talking about is not a statutory requirement, is a government decision around all state lands that are disposed of. So it applies to any public lands that are being disposed of, even if the LDA wasn't looking after it. And the definition of what public lands are is at the beginning of the general scheme. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Certainly some questions answered, but lots of more questions arise. I suppose my big sticking point is ownership. It seems like a massive giveaway of publicly held assets for 15,000 social houses. I know there will be 45 affordable, but we still haven't defined what that is. So, in terms of cost-benefit analysis, I have a big question. And very big questions about cost rental. If 60% of the cost rentals could be held by, say, like Irish Rets, how do you control the affordability of the rents, and how do you guarantee the securities of tenure? In our constitution, private property is everything. So, Articles 40 and 43. So unless we crack the ownership question, I would have a huge concern about what we're proposing here. So that would be one, and I think that's for us to tease out as a committee. Big questions about governance as well, I would want to see a lot more strengthening of the measures that are being proposed, particularly in terms of the designated activities company and potential SPVs and PPPs. We've seen collapses of the likes of Carillion in the past, so we would need to see protections there, and I would like to see a lot more detail, and I would like to see the constitution, and I would like to hear from other your other collaborators like local authorities. I'd like to hear from them about what they think about this, the housing agency, and I think that would be important for us as a committee to hear their views on what's proposed, and if it is quite as added value and as rosy as you presented. Finally, I'd like to know who ERA is, New Era is. I think the Kenny report needs to be uppermost in our minds because I think that was a really sterling piece of work that we really haven't paid proper attention to. And lastly, I suppose, you know, it's homes we're talking about, it's not products. And I think we need to come back to that because that's really what we're trying to achieve here. And the question is this the best way to generate those homes? There's a protest outside Raise the Roof, which is all about people who don't have homes or don't have secure homes. You know, I think that has to be the driving force here. So if this is the right way to do it and we can get it right in legislation, that's wonderful. But I think we just do need to have those answers. So they're my final points, really.
Senator Marie.
Senator, there were a couple of issues there, important ones. I think the issue about ownership, just to say that I know John had answered earlier some of the points around this. What we're clearly trying to do, homes for people is what is critically at the central objective for this. And I said in the outset, it's having those in the right place at the right time, and I suppose also at the right price in terms of affordability. So if we take the components of the different elements, the lands that we're transferring from public ownership to the LDA are remaining in public ownership until they do something with them. They either become social housing, which goes into local authority or AHB stock, they become affordable housing for purchase or for rent, which the models would lie. Obviously, if they're purchased, they're going to an individual homeowner, and if they are for private sale, they go to a private homeowner. And any funds then come back in to be regenerated and build more homes. So that's in essence the model that's
You
there.
answered the question on profits very well, but it is more about the ownership and the transfer that I have concerns.
So I think John can probably come out. I think John kind of this is a key piece of this being a public company that is dealing in the public good, and the public good being maximising what we can get out of these sites in terms of homes and other urban development. I note the points around governance. We might see, if, you know, as it's useful, how we pull some of those things together for the committee, if that would be useful, you know, in terms of those governance, because I understand that there can be complexities about it, and obviously the genesis of much of this is, as you say, in the Kenny report in terms of active land management, and that New Era is part of the NTMA family. It's set up under statute under the NTMA Act. It is the state's shareholder executive. So its role is to advise ministers on a range of commercial bodies to ensure that the state as the shareholder in that body, I think, Senator, the precise point that the commercial mandate and the public policy are being appropriately met. So it deals with the ESB, Irish Water, gas networks, DAA, a number, all of those, and will also deal with the LDA.
John, are you okay?
Just to make one or two comments, just to more an acknowledgement, Senator, as well, that around the permanent affordability, we're kind of dealing with this issue as well with the local authority in Dún Laoghaire. The elected members are saying, well, how do we know it's going to be permanent affordability? I think what we have to realise is that we all want the same thing. What we said to them is that we want it to be affordable permanently as well. So we will certainly, our interests are certainly aligned, and we're as one on this, and we will come up with appropriate structures to ensure that that happens. And your point as well around the dealing with third parties and, you know, the collapse of some contracting firms out there is a very apt one, not a situation we want to find ourselves in. So we would certainly build our own internal processes to mitigate that risk insofar as possible.